The scales told lies that morning in Malad City, Idaho, but Zelda Raines did not know it yet as she watched the merchant's thick fingers add weight after weight to the brass pan, his face growing darker with each passing second while the autumn wind of 1878 rattled the windows of his general store. She had come to sell her late mother's silver candlesticks, family heirlooms that represented the last connection to a gentler life before fever had taken both her parents within a week of each other, leaving Zelda alone at 19 with nothing but a failing homestead and debts that multiplied like rabbits in spring. The merchant, Gordon Whitfield, had a reputation in town for fair dealing, or so she had believed until this moment when his eyes narrowed and his mouth twisted into something ugly and accusing. "These candlesticks are lighter than you claimed," Gordon said, his voice carrying through the store where three other customers had stopped their browsing to watch. "You told me they were solid silver, 2 pounds each at minimum. My scales here show they are barely a pound and a half together. You are trying to cheat me, Miss Raines." Zelda felt the blood drain from her face as every eye in the store turned toward her. "That cannot be right. My mother always said they were solid silver passed down from her grandmother. I would never lie about such a thing." "The scales do not lie," Gordon said, his voice growing louder, more theatrical, as if he enjoyed the audience. "What lies is a desperate woman trying to get more money than her goods are worth. I have half a mind to call the sheriff and have you arrested for attempted fraud." The words hit Zelda like physical blows. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Please, there must be some mistake. I need that money to pay my property taxes, or I will lose my land. I would not cheat anyone." "Should have thought of that before you came in here with false claims," Gordon said. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, looking satisfied with himself. "I will give you $3 for the candlesticks, and you should be grateful I am willing to buy them at all after this dishonesty." $3. She needed at least 15 to make her tax payment. Zelda opened her mouth to protest again when a voice spoke from behind her, calm and measured, but carrying an edge like a well-honed blade. "Those scales are rigged." Everyone turned toward the speaker. Zelda had noticed him when she entered, a tall cowboy standing near the back of the store examining saddle blankets. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore the dust of the trail on his clothes and moved with the easy confidence of someone who had faced down danger and lived to tell about it. Something about his face seemed familiar, though Zelda could not place where she might have seen him before. Gordon's face flushed red. "What did you say?" The cowboy walked forward, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. "I said your scales are rigged. I have been watching you weigh goods for the past 20 minutes while I decided on my purchases. Every time you weigh something a customer is selling, those scales show light. Every time you weigh something you are selling to a customer, they show heavy. It is quite the profitable system you have going." "That is a serious accusation," Gordon sputtered. "I have been running this store for 12 years with a spotless reputation." "Then you will not mind if I test your scales," the cowboy said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. "I have here exactly 1 pound of silver dollars. I counted them and weighed them at the bank in Pocatello 2 days ago because I needed to know my traveling funds. 50 silver dollars, which by government standard weighs exactly 16 ounces. Let us see what your scales say." Gordon's face had gone from red to pale. "I do not have time for these games." "Make time," the cowboy said. And though his voice remained quiet, something in his tone made it clear this was not a request. "Unless you would prefer I go get the sheriff myself and have him investigate your business practices." The other customers were watching with open interest now. One of them, an older woman Zelda recognized as Mrs. Patterson, who owned the boarding house, nodded vigorously. "I would like to see this test myself. I have always suspected my flour weighed light when I bought it here." Gordon looked trapped. His eyes darted around the store as if seeking escape, but finally he gestured roughly at his scales. "Fine, waste everyone's time, but when those scales show exactly 1 pound, I expect an apology. The cowboy placed the stack of silver dollars carefully on the scale's pan. The weights Gordon had been using for Zelda's candlesticks were still on the other side. The cowboy added and subtracted weights until the scale balanced, then looked at the measurement. 14 ounces, he announced to the room. Your scales say 1 pound of government certified silver coins weighs 14 ounces. That is 2 ounces light, which coincidentally would cost a customer about $1 on every $8 of transaction. Very profitable indeed. The room erupted in angry voices. Mrs. Patterson began loudly recounting every purchase she had made over the past year. Another customer, a rancher named Thompson, started demanding refunds. Gordon held up his hands, his face now shining with sweat. The scales must be broken. I had no idea. This is not my fault. Broken scales do not consistently weigh light in the seller's favor and heavy in the buyer's, the cowboy said. He reached across the counter and picked up the brass weight marked 1 pound. He bounced it in his palm, then produced a knife and scraped at the base of the weight. Soft lead shavings fell away, revealing a hollow cavity that had been filled with the lighter metal and sealed with a wax that matched the brass color. These weights have been doctored. Someone drilled them out and filled them with lead so they look like they weigh 1 pound, but actually weigh less. That someone was you. Gordon's face crumpled. For a moment, Zelda thought he might deny it further, but then his shoulders sagged. I had debts. The store was failing. I needed money. So you stole it from your customers, the cowboy said, his voice hard now. From people who trusted you. From young women like Miss Raines here who are already struggling. Mrs. Patterson had already dispatched her grandson to fetch the sheriff. The boy ran from the store at full speed, eager to be part of the drama. Gordon slumped against his counter, all the fight gone out of him. Zelda stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, she had been the one accused of fraud, facing possible arrest. Now the whole truth had turned inside out like a jacket in a windstorm. The cowboy turned to her, his expression softening. Do you have those candlesticks with you still? Zelda nodded mutely and retrieved them from where Gordon had set them aside. The cowboy examined them carefully, then looked around the store. Does anyone here have scales we can trust? Mrs. Patterson spoke up immediately. My boarding house has balance scales that were certified by the territorial inspector last month. They are 2 blocks away. I will bring them myself. She hurried out, moving with surprising speed for a woman of her years. The cowboy gestured for Zelda to sit in one of the chairs near the store's cold stove. You look like you need to catch your breath. This has been quite a morning for you. Zelda sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I do not even know your name. You just saved my reputation, possibly my freedom. Who are you? Lucas Zimmerman, he said, extending his hand. I am passing through on my way to Montana. I have a job waiting at a ranch near Helena. She shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength in his grip. Zelda Raines, I owe you more than I can say. If you had not been here, if you had not noticed what he was doing, I would have been the one arrested. I noticed because I have seen it before, Lucas said. He pulled another chair over and sat down, keeping a respectful distance but angling toward her so they could talk quietly, while the other customers continued their angry discussions about Gordon's fraud. 3 years ago in Kansas, I watched a grain merchant use the same trick on farmers. He stole thousands of dollars before someone finally caught him. The weights looked perfect unless you knew to check them carefully. I learned that day to always watch scales when I am selling or buying. You have a good eye, Zelda said. She found herself studying his face, trying to understand this stranger who had stepped in to help her without hesitation. His eyes were kind, despite their sharp intelligence, and his features had a straightforward honesty that made her want to trust him. Most people would not have gotten involved. Most people are not as bothered by injustice as they should be, Lucas said. My father taught me that if you see something wrong and you have the power to fix it, staying silent makes you complicit. I could not stand by and watch that man steal from you and ruin your name. The sheriff arrived then, a tired-looking man named Ben Carson, who had been keeping law in Malad City for the past decade. Lucas explained what he had discovered, showing the rigged weights and demonstrating with his coins how much lighter they measured than they should. Sheriff Carson's face grew grimmer with each detail. Gordon Whitfield, I am placing you under arrest for fraud, the sheriff said. How long has this been going on? 6 months, Gordon admitted, all the bluster gone from him now. Maybe 8. I do not remember exactly when I started. We will need to notify every customer who has done business with you in that time, Sheriff Carson said. This is going to be a mess to sort out. He looked at Lucas with something like respect. Good work catching this. The town owes you thanks. Mrs. Patterson returned with her scales, and they weighed Zelda's candlesticks properly. They came to just over 4 pounds of solid silver, exactly as her mother had always claimed. Lucas helped Mrs. Patterson look up the current silver price in the newspaper and calculated that the candlesticks were worth at least $30, possibly more to a collector who appreciated their craftsmanship. I will give you $35 for them, Mrs. Patterson said. My daughter is getting married next spring, and these would make a beautiful wedding gift. Better they go to someone who will treasure them than to a merchant who just wants to melt them down. Zelda hesitated, emotion tightening her throat. These candlesticks had lit countless family dinners, had been polished lovingly by her mother's hands, represented a connection to her past that she was severing. But her parents would have wanted her to survive, to keep their land, to have a future. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I know your daughter will appreciate them. The transaction was completed with Mrs. Patterson's honest scales and Sheriff Carson as witness. Zelda tucked the money into her pocket, feeling the weight of it like a stone lifting from her chest. She had enough now for her taxes and a little left over for supplies to get her through the winter. As the sheriff led Gordon away and the other customers dispersed to spread the news of the scandal through town, Zelda found herself alone in the store with Lucas. He had helped Mrs. Patterson carry her scales back to the boarding house and returned to collect the saddle blanket he had decided to purchase. I cannot thank you enough, Zelda said. You have given me back my future. If I had lost my reputation for honesty in this town, I would have had to leave. No one would do business with me. And if I had been arrested, even if I was eventually cleared, the damage would have been done. Lucas looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. You do not need to thank me for doing what was right. Any decent person would have done the same. But you are the one who did it, Zelda insisted. She studied him for a moment, then made a decision. Please let me at least buy you dinner. Mrs. Patterson serves meals at her boarding house, and the food is much better than the hotel restaurant. It is the least I can do. Lucas hesitated, and Zelda could see him weighing the invitation. She held her breath, suddenly aware that she wanted very much for him to say yes, and not just because she owed him gratitude. There was something about Lucas Zimmerman that drew her, something steady and true that she had not encountered in many people. I would like that, Lucas said finally, and his smile transformed his serious face into something warmer. I was planning to move on today, but I suppose one more night in Malad City would not hurt. Besides, the sheriff might need my testimony when this goes to trial. They walked together to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, making small talk about the weather and the town. Zelda found herself relaxing in Lucas's presence, the tension of the morning's events slowly draining away. He had an easy way of listening, asking questions that showed genuine interest without prying into matters she might want to keep private. Mrs. Patterson was delighted to have them for dinner and insisted on setting them at her best table near the window. The meal was roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, simple fare but expertly prepared and generous in portion. Zelda ate with better appetite than she had enjoyed in weeks, the relief of having her tax money combining with the pleasant company to lift her spirits. Tell me about your homestead, Lucas said as they ate. What made your parents choose this area? Zelda set down her fork, gathering her thoughts. My father had worked as a clerk in St. Louis, but he always dreamed of having his own land. When the Homestead Act passed, he saw his opportunity. He had saved enough money for supplies and travel, and my mother was willing to come west despite leaving her family behind. They filed their claim in 1867, when I was 8 years old. It has been hard work, but they built a good life here. The soil is decent for growing hay and oats, and we had a small herd of cattle. When they died last spring, everything fell apart. I tried to keep up with the work, but I am one person where there were three. I had to sell the cattle to pay for the doctor and the funerals. Now I am just trying to hold on long enough to prove up the claim and get the deed. How much longer until you can do that? Lucas asked. 2 more years, Zelda said. 5 years of continuous residence and cultivation is required. We have been there 11 years, but my father had not yet applied for the final patent. I am afraid the land office will say the claim has to start over under my name, which would mean another 5 years. But I am hoping they will honor the work my parents did and let me continue their timeline. That seems only fair, Lucas said. You should not be punished for your parents' deaths. Fair does not always matter to government offices, Zelda said with a trace of bitterness. But I will fight for it. That land is all I have left of my family. The house my father built, the garden my mother planted, the trees they chose for shade. I cannot lose it. Lucas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I understand that feeling. My parents died too, 5 years ago. Cholera outbreak in the wagon train they were traveling with. They were trying to reach Oregon, wanted to start a new life out west. I was working on a ranch in Wyoming at the time, saving money to buy my own land someday. By the time word reached me, they were 3 months buried. I am so sorry, Zelda said softly. It is a terrible thing to lose parents. The world feels less safe somehow, less certain. It does, Lucas agreed. I think that is why I have been drifting these past years, working different ranches, never staying anywhere too long. I have not wanted to put down roots because roots can be torn up. But lately, I have been thinking it is time to stop running from that fear and build something permanent again. Is that why you are going to Montana, this ranch job? Lucas nodded. The owner is getting old and wants someone he can trust to eventually take over managing the place. If I do well, he has hinted I might be able to buy in as a partner. It is the kind of opportunity I have been waiting for. Steady work with a future attached to it. That sounds like a good situation, Zelda said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Of course, this man had plans and a future waiting elsewhere. Why should she feel sad about that? She had only just met him. But the connection she felt, the ease of talking with him, the way his presence made her feel safe and understood, these were rare gifts. She knew better than to think they would continue beyond this meal. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from books they had read to places they wanted to see, to small memories of their families that made them laugh and wince in equal measure. Mrs. Patterson eventually shooed them out, claiming she needed to clear the table for supper preparations, though her knowing smile suggested she was more interested in giving them privacy to continue their conversation elsewhere. Would you like to walk a bit? Lucas asked as they stood on the boarding house porch. I have been on horseback for days, and my legs could use the stretching. I would like that, Zelda said. They walked through Malad City's small downtown, past the courthouse and the church, the blacksmith shop and the saloon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets. A few people called out greetings to Zelda, and she could see the curious looks they gave Lucas walking beside her. News of the general store scandal had already spread, and she knew by tomorrow everyone would know that this stranger had defended her honor and exposed Gordon Whitfield's fraud. This is a pretty town, Lucas said as they walked. Quieter than most places I have been. It seems like a good place to build a life. It has been a good town to me mostly, Zelda said. People can be suspicious of a young woman living alone, but my parents were well respected and that goodwill has extended to me. At least until today, I thought it had. If Gordon had succeeded in making people believe I was a cheat, that would have changed quickly. But he did not succeed, Lucas reminded her. Your reputation is intact, and his is destroyed. Justice worked out properly for once. They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Zelda's homestead was 3 miles to the northeast, and she needed to start back soon if she wanted to get home before full dark. But she was reluctant to end this time with Lucas, knowing that once they parted ways, she would likely never see him again. When are you leaving for Montana? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual. I was planning to leave tomorrow morning, Lucas said. But I have been thinking about that. The sheriff will need me to testify when Gordon's case comes to trial, and I noticed the livery stable has a help wanted sign in the window. I could use some time to rest my horse and earn a bit more traveling money. Maybe I will stay in Malad City for a week or two. Zelda's heart lifted at his words, but she tried not to read too much into them. The livery owner is a good man, Henry Chen. He is fair and honest, which is more than can be said for some employers. If you need work, he would treat you right. I will talk to him in the morning then, Lucas said. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made Zelda catch her breath. The truth is, I am not ready to say goodbye to you yet, Zelda Rains. I know we only met this morning, but I have not felt this connected to someone in a long time, maybe ever. I would like to get to know you better if you are willing. Zelda felt warmth spread through her chest, a combination of hope and fear that left her slightly dizzy. I would like that too, very much, but I do not want to stand in the way of your opportunity in Montana. The job will keep for a couple of weeks, Lucas said. I sent word I was coming, but I did not give an exact date. And if I show up a little late, well, any employer worth working for will understand that sometimes plans change. Sometimes something more important comes along. They walked back toward town slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end. When they reached the boarding house where Lucas had taken a room, he asked if he could call on her at her homestead the next day. Zelda agreed eagerly, giving him directions to her property. They stood in the deepening twilight, awkward and expectant, until finally Lucas took her hand and squeezed it gently. Thank you for today, he said, for letting me help you, for sharing your story with me, for giving me a reason to stay a little longer in this place. I will see you tomorrow. Zelda rode home on her old mare, with her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. The money in her pocket meant security, at least for the immediate future. But more than that, the prospect of seeing Lucas again tomorrow, of continuing the connection they had begun, filled her with an excitement she had almost forgotten was possible. Life had been so hard for so long, just a grinding series of chores and worries. Now suddenly there was something to look forward to, something bright on the horizon. The next morning, Zelda woke early and found herself taking unusual care with her appearance. She braided her dark blonde hair neatly and put on her better dress, the blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Then she felt foolish for the vanity and changed back into her work dress. Then she changed again. Finally, she settled on practical clothes, but made sure they were clean and mended. Lucas was coming to visit her homestead, which meant he would see her real life, the hard work and isolation and shabby furniture that represented her daily existence. She would not pretend to be something she was not. She spent the morning doing the necessary chores, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, milking her one remaining cow, checking the hay shed where she stored the winter feed she had managed to cut before the first frost. The homestead looked shabby to her critical eye. The house needed paint, and the barn needed new shingles, and the fence around the vegetable garden sagged in places. But everything was fundamentally sound, built well by her father's careful hands. It just needed time and money and another pair of hands to help, all things she did not have. Lucas arrived mid-morning, riding a sturdy bay gelding and leading a pack mule. He had stopped at the general store, which had reopened under temporary management by the mayor's wife, and bought supplies including fresh coffee and sugar and a sack of cornmeal. I thought you might be running low on some things, he said, as he unloaded the supplies onto her kitchen table. "And I owe you for the invitation to see your place." "You do not owe me anything," Zelda protested, but she was touched by the thoughtfulness. Coffee especially was a luxury she had been doing without, stretching her last half-pound for weeks by reusing the grounds. Lucas looked around the homestead with an appraising eye that Zelda recognized as belonging to someone who understood land and farming. He walked the property with her, examining the hayshed and the barn, the chicken coop and the small corral where she kept her mare and milk cow. He asked intelligent questions about water sources and soil drainage, crop rotation, and winter feed requirements. His questions were not intrusive, but genuinely interested, and Zelda found herself explaining her situation in detail. "I have about 30 acres in hay production," she said as they walked through the stubbled field where she had cut her crop in August. "It is not much compared to the big ranches, but it was enough to feed our cattle herd and sell a little surplus to neighbors. Now, without the cattle, I am selling as much hay as I can, but prices are low this year because everyone had good crops. I made enough to pay for seed and basic supplies, but not much beyond that. Next year, I am thinking of trying to put in oats or barley in addition to the hay, something that might bring a better price." "You would need help with that," Lucas observed. "One person cannot manage both hay and grain crops, plus all the other work of keeping a homestead running." "I know," Zelda said quietly. "I have been trying to figure out how to afford hired help, but there is no money for wages. I thought about finding a husband, someone who would work the land with me. But I do not want to marry just for practical reasons. I have seen marriages like that, where there is no love or respect, just two people trapped in duty. I do not want that life." Lucas stopped walking and turned to look at her. "What do you want, Zelda?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Zelda met his eyes, feeling the pull between them like a physical force. "I want what my parents had. I want partnership and affection, and someone who sees me as an equal, not as property or a servant. I want to wake up each morning glad to face the day, because I am facing it with someone I love. I want to build something lasting with someone I trust. Is that too much to hope for?" "No," Lucas said softly. "That is exactly what everyone should hope for, and exactly what you deserve." They stood in the middle of the hayfield, with the autumn wind blowing around them, neither moving nor speaking. Zelda felt her heartbeat accelerate as Lucas took a step closer. His hand came up to touch her cheek, gentle and hesitant, giving her time to pull away. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a moment at the simple comfort of human contact. "I know this is fast," Lucas said. "I know we have only just met, but I feel something with you that I have never felt before. Like I have been looking for something without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you are. Does that sound crazy?" "If it is crazy, then I am crazy too," Zelda whispered. "I feel it as well, like recognizing something I did not know I had lost." Lucas leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of question. Zelda kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. The kiss deepened, gaining intensity, until finally they broke apart, both breathing hard. "Stay," Zelda said impulsively. "I know you have that job waiting in Montana, and I have no right to ask you to give that up. But stay here. Help me prove up this homestead. We can build something together, the kind of life we both want. Please, Lucas, stay." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, and Zelda could see the conflict in his eyes. The practical part of him knew that Montana job was secure, a guaranteed future. What she was offering was a risk, a gamble on a failing homestead, and a woman he had just met. There were 1,000 reasons to say no and ride away tomorrow as planned. "Yes," Lucas said. "I will stay." The next weeks were the happiest Zelda could remember since before her parents died. Lucas moved his belongings into the barn, taking up residence in the small tack room that could be made comfortable with a stove and some blankets. It was not proper for him to live in the house with her, not until they were married, and both of them were conscious of maintaining her reputation in the community. But he was there every day from dawn to dusk, working alongside her on all the endless tasks of keeping the homestead running. With two people working, everything became easier. Lucas repaired the barn roof and fixed the sagging fence, mended harness and chopped firewood for the winter. Zelda focused on preserving food and preparing the house for the cold months ahead, sewing warmer clothes and making soap and candles. In the evenings, they sat together in the kitchen, talking by lamplight about their pasts and their dreams for the future. I sent a letter to the ranch in Montana, Lucas told her one night, about a week after he had decided to stay. I explained that my situation had changed and I would not be taking the job after all. I thanked them for the opportunity and recommended a good man I worked with last year in Wyoming who might be interested in the position. Do you regret it? Zelda asked quietly. Giving up something certain for something uncertain? Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. Not for a moment. I am exactly where I want to be. They had not spoken yet about marriage, though it hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise. Zelda wanted Lucas to be sure, to have time to know what he was committing to before making it legal and permanent. And Lucas seemed to understand her need to be certain of her own heart, to know this was love and not just desperation disguised as affection. The test came in mid-October when an early storm blew through, dropping 6 inches of wet snow overnight. Zelda woke to find the barn door had blown open in the wind and 3 of her chickens had escaped, probably caught by coyotes. Worse, the milk cow had gotten spooked and kicked over the water bucket, soaking the feed she had stored there. It was the kind of small disaster that would have left her in tears a month ago, feeling overwhelmed and defeated. Instead, Lucas was already up and dealing with the situation by the time she reached the barn. He had repaired the door, tracked down 2 of the chickens who had sheltered under the porch, and was spreading out the wet feed to dry. "It is not as bad as it looks," he said when he saw her stricken face. "We only lost 1 chicken, and most of this feed can be saved if we dry it quickly. Could have been much worse." They worked together all morning, salvaging what they could. When they finally finished, Zelda found herself laughing, covered in hay chaff and chicken feathers, standing in the barn next to Lucas, who looked equally disheveled. "If you wanted to see me at my absolute worst, I think you have accomplished that today." "You look beautiful," Lucas said, and the sincerity in his voice made it clear he meant it. "You look strong and capable and completely yourself. That is the most beautiful thing I can imagine." Later that day, after they had cleaned up and eaten lunch, Lucas asked her to walk with him. They went to the small rise behind the house where Zelda's parents were buried under simple wooden crosses. She had planted wildflower seeds around the graves in the spring, and a few hardy asters were still blooming despite the early snow. "I wanted to do this properly," Lucas said. He took both her hands in his, and Zelda felt her heart begin to race. "Zelda Rains, I know we have not known each other long in terms of days and weeks, but I feel like I have known you much longer, like I have been waiting my whole life to find you. You are strong and brave and kind and honest. You make me want to be a better man. You make me want to build something lasting and raise a family and put down roots so deep nothing can ever tear them up. Will you marry me?" Zelda felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Lucas Zimmerman. I love you. I think I loved you from that first moment in the general store when you stood up for me. And I want everything you said, all of it, the life and the family and the forever." Lucas pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, holding her like she was precious and fragile and infinitely valuable all at once. They stood that way for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms beside her parents' graves, and Zelda felt like she could sense her mother and father's approval in the wind that blew around them. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Malad City. Mrs. Patterson served as Zelda's matron of honor, having become a fierce friend since the incident at the general store. Henry Chen from the livery stable stood up for Lucas, having grown close to him during the days Lucas had worked there before committing fully to the homestead. Sheriff Carson attended, as did many of the townspeople who had come to respect both Zelda and Lucas for their honesty and hard work. Gordon Whitfield's trial had concluded the week before, resulting in his conviction and a sentence of 2 years in the territorial prison plus restitution to all his victims. The general store had been sold to pay the debts, and a new merchant from Salt Lake City had bought the business and was working to restore its reputation. Zelda had received her share of the restitution, another $15 that Gordon had apparently overcharged her on various purchases over the past year. Every penny helped. The wedding was simple but heartfelt. Zelda wore a dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. Lucas bought a new suit for the occasion, dark wool that made him look handsome and solemn. They exchanged vows with steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Mrs. Patterson hosted a wedding dinner at the boarding house, a feast of roast beef and mashed potatoes, fresh bread and apple pie. There was music and dancing, and Zelda found herself whirled around the room by various townspeople who wanted to congratulate her and wish her well. But the best moments were when Lucas claimed her for a dance, holding her close and looking down at her with such love in his eyes that she felt her heart might burst from happiness. They rode home together as the sun set, Lucas driving the wagon with Zelda tucked against his side. The autumn evening was cold but clear, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When they reached the homestead, their homestead now, Lucas lifted Zelda down from the wagon seat and carried her over the threshold, a traditional gesture that made them both laugh. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of discovery and care. Lucas was gentle with her, aware of her inexperience, taking time to make sure she felt safe and loved. Zelda had worried she might feel awkward or frightened, but instead she felt cherished, desired in a way that made her feel powerful and feminine all at once. They talked and laughed and loved each other through the night, and when Zelda finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt more content than she ever had in her life. The first winter of their marriage was challenging but manageable. With both of them working together, they were able to keep up with the livestock care and maintain the house and buildings against the harsh weather. They spent the long evenings planning for spring, deciding which fields to plant in hay and which to try for oats, discussing whether they had enough money to buy a few head of cattle or if they should wait another year. Lucas proved to be skilled at carpentry, and he spent some of the winter months building new furniture for the house. He made a proper bed frame to replace the sagging rope bed Zelda had been using, a chest of drawers with smooth-fitting joints, and a rocking chair that would be perfect for a mother holding a baby. This last item he presented to Zelda in January, with a meaningful look that made her blush and smile. "Are you telling me something?" she asked, running her hand over the smooth wood. "I am hoping we will need this eventually," Lucas said, "but there is no rush. I am happy to have you to myself for a while longer." But as winter turned to spring, Zelda began to suspect she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses in February and then again in March. Her breasts became tender, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain before she raised Lucas's hopes. But when April arrived and there was no longer any doubt, she told him one evening after dinner, "Lucas, I have something to tell you. I am fairly certain that I am going to have a baby." Lucas's face went through a series of expressions, shock to joy, to concern, to elation. "Are you certain? When? Are you feeling well? Should we get the doctor?" Zelda laughed at his tumble of questions. "I am certain. I think the baby will come in October, maybe early November. I feel well, just a little sick in the mornings. And we do not need the doctor yet. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. I will be fine." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, as if she might break. "We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family. Zelda, you have made me the happiest man alive. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Zelda continued to work on the homestead, though Lucas increasingly took over the heavier tasks, insisting she rest more. They planted their crops successfully, with the oats looking particularly promising. Lucas bought 3 young heifers from a rancher who was reducing his herd, using some of the money they had carefully saved over the winter. With luck, the cattle would breed, and they could start building their herd back up. In June, Zelda received word from the land office that her claim had been approved to continue under her parents' timeline. She would be able to apply for the final patent in 2 more years, making the land fully hers without question. The news came as a huge relief, eliminating one of her constant worries. With Lucas beside her and the baby coming and the homestead secured, everything seemed to be falling into place. Mrs. Patterson came to stay with them in late October as Zelda's time drew near. The older woman had helped deliver dozens of babies over her years running the boarding house and was a calming presence as Zelda began to feel nervous about the approaching labor. Lucas was a bundle of anxious energy, constantly asking if there was anything he could do, hovering until Mrs. Patterson finally shooed him outside to work off his nerves by splitting firewood. The labor began on a cold November morning, 3 days after the first real snowfall. Zelda woke with the now familiar tightening across her belly, but this time the sensation did not fade after a few minutes. Instead, it grew stronger, more regular. She woke Lucas, who immediately went into a panic, rushing around gathering supplies they had already prepared weeks ago. Mrs. Patterson arrived within an hour, took one look at the situation, and calmly began boiling water and laying out clean linens. The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon. It was hard and painful and exhausting, but every time Zelda felt like she could not endure another moment, Lucas was there holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was and how proud he was of her. Mrs. Patterson coached her through each contraction, and finally, as the sun began to set, a baby's cry filled the small house. "You have a son," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the squalling infant on Zelda's chest. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs." Zelda looked down at her son, seeing Lucas's dark hair and her own nose, tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. She felt overwhelmed with love and wonder and a fierce protectiveness that took her breath away. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Lucas was crying unashamedly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and newborn son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named the baby Thomas after Lucas's father, with the middle name Daniel after Zelda's father. Thomas Daniel Zimmerman would carry both their family legacies forward, a symbol of the new life they were building together. Mrs. Patterson stayed for a week, helping Zelda recover and learn to care for the baby, teaching her how to nurse and swaddle and recognize what different cries meant. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert, with a temperament that seemed to balance Zelda's quiet determination with Lucas's easy confidence. As the weeks passed and Zelda regained her strength, she marveled at how much her life had changed in barely more than a year. She had gone from desperate and alone to secure and loved, from facing the loss of everything to having more than she had ever imagined possible. That winter was harder with a baby to care for, but also more joyful. The house rang with Thomas's gurgles and cries, and Zelda and Lucas took turns walking him during the night when he fussed. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment holding his son, talking to him, singing him songs from his own childhood. Watching her husband with their baby made Zelda fall in love with him all over again. Spring brought new challenges and new blessings. The oat crop had been successful enough that they had money to buy more cattle, and Lucas spent weeks building a larger corral and repairing the barn to hold the expanded herd. Zelda juggled caring for Thomas with maintaining the household and helping with farm work when she could. It was exhausting but satisfying, the kind of tired that came from good work and purpose. By the time they celebrated their second wedding anniversary in November of 1880, the homestead was beginning to prosper. They had 12 head of cattle, a productive hay operation, and fields of oats that had brought a good price at market. They had expanded the house, adding a separate bedroom so Thomas could have his own space. Lucas had hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work during planting and harvest seasons, paying him a fair wage they could now afford. More importantly, they had built a life full of love and partnership. They still sat together in the evenings after Thomas was asleep, talking about their days and their dreams, making plans for the future. They still kissed each other hello and goodbye, still held hands when they walked together, still looked at each other with the same sense of wonder and gratitude they had felt in those first days. "Do you ever regret giving up that job in Montana?" Zelda asked one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas was almost a year old now, toddling around and getting into everything. Lucas pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Not once, not ever. This is where I am meant to be. You are who I am meant to be with. Everything that matters is right here." "I feel the same way," Zelda said softly. "I used to be so afraid of the future, so worried about surviving each day. Now I look forward to every morning because I get to face it with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas babbling to himself as he played with his toys. A coyote called in the distance, and their cattle lowed softly in the barn. The wind carried the scent of hay and earth and the promise of winter coming. In 1882, Zelda successfully proved up the homestead claim, receiving the final patent that made the land legally and permanently theirs. By then, they had expanded their holdings, purchasing an adjacent quarter section from a neighbor who was moving to Oregon. Their cattle herd had grown to 30 head, and they were known throughout the region for producing high-quality hay and grain. Lucas had become a respected member of the community, serving on the school board and helping organize a cooperative marketing association for local farmers. That same year, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because life was simply less stressful with the homestead secure and money in the bank. In April of 1883, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Marie Zimmerman. Sarah had her mother's blonde hair and her father's blue-gray eyes, and from her first days, she showed a personality quite different from her older brothers. Where Thomas was cautious and observant, Sarah was fearless and energetic, crawling and then walking earlier than Thomas had, always wanting to explore and discover. The years that followed were full and rich. They had two more children, a son named Jacob in 1885 and another daughter named Ruth in 1888. The house was constantly noisy with children playing and laughing, and Zelda thought her parents would have loved seeing their grandchildren running through the home they had built. Lucas proved to be as devoted a father to their daughters as to their sons, teaching all the children to ride and work with cattle, making sure the girls learned the same practical skills as the boys. "You never know what life will throw at you," he told them. "Everyone should know how to take care of themselves and their land." As the children grew, Zelda sometimes thought back to that morning in the general store when Lucas had stepped forward to defend her honor. She thought about how one moment of courage and honesty had changed the entire trajectory of her life. If Lucas had stayed silent, if he had not noticed the rigged scales or had chosen not to get involved, she would have lost everything. Her reputation would have been destroyed, her land forfeit, her future bleak and uncertain. Instead, she had found love and partnership and built a family and a legacy. The homestead that had once seemed like an impossible burden to maintain alone had become a thriving operation that would pass to her children and grandchildren. The life that had seemed over when her parents died had transformed into something richer and fuller than she ever could have imagined. In 1890, Lucas was elected mayor of Malad City, a position he held with the same integrity and honesty he brought to everything else. Zelda became involved in the territorial suffrage movement, working to secure voting rights for women and better educational opportunities for all children regardless of gender. They used their success and their voices to help others, remembering what it felt like to struggle and be vulnerable. The children grew and thrived. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with animals and eventually took over managing the cattle operation. Sarah inherited her mother's fierce independence and announced at 16 that she intended to attend college and become a teacher, a plan her parents supported enthusiastically. Jacob loved working the land and could coax crops from soil others considered too poor to bother with. Ruth, the youngest, had a gift for numbers and kept the farm's books with meticulous accuracy from the time she was 12. As Zelda and Lucas grew older, moving into their 40s and then their 50s, their love only deepened. They had weathered droughts and storms, sick children and financial setbacks, the normal trials of life and family. Through it all, they had remained partners, facing each challenge together and celebrating each victory side by side. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in November of 1903, their children organized a party at the homestead. All four children were there with their own families now. Thomas with his wife and three children, Sarah with her husband and two daughters, Jacob with his fiancée, and Ruth with her young son. The house was crowded and loud and full of laughter. After dinner, as the party continued around them, Lucas took Zelda's hand and led her outside onto the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. The November air was cold, but the sky was clear, full of stars that seemed close enough to touch. 25 years, Lucas said, pulling her close. When I walked into that general store in 1878, I had no idea my whole life was about to change. Neither did I, Zelda said, leaning into his warmth. I thought I was selling my mother's candlesticks. Instead, I found everything I had been missing. Do you remember what you asked me that first day? You wanted to know who I was. I gave you my name, but I think the real answer is that I was a man looking for home without knowing it. And you were home, Zelda. You have been home every day since. Zelda turned in his arms to face him, seeing the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes that marked years of laughter and sun and hard work. He was still the most handsome man she had ever known, still the person she most wanted to talk to at the end of each day, still the one who made her heart beat faster when he smiled at her. I love you, Lucas Zimmerman. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more, and then for whatever time we have beyond that. You saved me in that general store, but you have been saving me every day since by being exactly who you are. And I love you, Zelda Zimmerman. You gave me a reason to put down roots and stay in one place. You gave me a family and a purpose and a life worth living. Everything good in my world exists because of you. They kissed there on the porch, not caring that their children might see them through the window, not caring about anything except this moment and this love that had sustained them through so many years. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, and voices rose in song. The sound drifted out into the cold November night, a celebration of family and love and lives well lived. As the years continued to pass, Zelda and Lucas watched their children build their own lives and families. They became grandparents many times over, and then great-grandparents, their legacy growing far beyond the boundaries of their homestead. The land they had worked so hard to maintain and improve was passed down through generations, remaining in the family as a testament to what love and partnership could build. They grew old together gracefully, their bodies slowing down, but their minds staying sharp and their affection for each other never dimming. On summer evenings, they would sit on their porch holding hands, watching the sun set over land they had made their own through sweat and faith and stubborn determination. They would talk about their children and grandchildren, about the old days and the good memories, about how grateful they were for the life they had shared. Lucas lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep one autumn night in 1928, 50 years after he had first walked into that general store and seen a young woman being falsely accused. Zelda held his hand as he took his last breath, telling him she loved him, thanking him for the life they had built together. She buried him next to her parents on the rise behind the house, under a strong oak tree he had planted the year they were married. Zelda lived another 6 years without him, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the great love of her life, and one true love was more than most people got. She spent her remaining years writing down the story of her life with Lucas, wanting future generations to know how it had all begun, how one cowboy's courage and honesty had changed everything. She died at age 86 in the spring of 1934, surrounded by her family in the house her father had built, and her husband had expanded and made into a true home. Her children buried her next to Lucas under the oak tree, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. The homestead remained in the family for generations after that, worked by Zimmermans who carried forward the values of honesty, hard work, and love that Zelda and Lucas had instilled. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder of how one moment of standing up for what is right can echo through decades and generations. In that general store in Malad City, Idaho, on an autumn morning in 1878, when Lucas Zimmerman saw injustice and chose to act, he set in motion a love story that would span more than half a century. He proved that scales could be rigged and weights could be false, but that truth and courage could cut through deception. He showed that honor and integrity mattered, that standing up for a stranger was worth the risk. And in doing so, he found not just justice for one woman wrongly accused, but a love that would define both their lives and create a legacy that stretched far into the future. From false accusations and rigged scales came partnership and family, struggle and triumph, and a love story that proved sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply tell the truth and help someone in need. The rest, as their children and grandchildren would say when telling the story, was history written in love and sealed with forever?